73 in this series where I'm programming an NES game live from scratch on Twitch. Last week we had Derek Andrews from Gradual Games on the stream, and we talked for a really long time, but had a good time chatting about homebrew and programming and experiences related to programming and all that good stuff. So if you didn't check it out, it's posted up on YouTube. You should definitely watch it. Some good stuff there. So thanks to Derek again for being on, and we are back to programming the game. And at this point, we had been working on the asset tool. Specifically, we had been working on the processes of exporting content from the tool. So taking both the entire map and exporting it, but also converting PNGs to sprites and metatiles. And we had done that through a couple of things. We had built a color conversion process using a transform from RGB to YUV in order to make that color mapping from the standard arbitrary RGB to the NES's palette. We then use that to generate our metatile or sprite with the appropriate colors, and then we were able to generate the output we wanted, and we ended up with something that, oops, I shouldn't do that, because every time I do that, well, this time it didn't drop frames. Previously, it would drop frames if I did that, but maybe the new CPU and graphics card are paying off here. So we had taken this new gradient and converted this over, and I had done that just as an example of converting with new colors, gradient.metatile, and so when we launch this, now we get the view of the metatile like we had before. So instead of it being a view that is 100%, or sorry, the tool, instead of it being 100% visual, it's a little bit more command line driven, so that we can get the make file eventually generating all of this output, but then when we want to do things like drawing the collision points on here, we are able to do that. And so if we take something like where is that in here? If we take one of our existing metatiles like the bumper, this will load up like before or not. Okay, that's weird. Is that a bad path? Should probably give me an error instead of loading nothing. Anyway, so this is the bumper, and that's the grid, the metatile with the collision points, and it had an extra collision point there. So let's get rid of that, and then we can export the whole map again by doing export projects shooter assets shooter.txt. That's our project file format. And that exported, or should have exported, everything. And it looks like it did. And then we go back to here and we replace all the files and we rebuild. And if we go to Messen and we launch the ROM, there shouldn't have been any change, but now it shouldn't cause a collision with the corner like it was before. So that's all working. One thing I did realize that I wanted to do today was I wanted to slow down the scrolling a little bit. I feel like that's scrolling a little bit faster than I want. If you've played the game Twinbee before, I realized that that had more of the style of scrolling that I was looking for. So it was a lot slower, but it because of the graphics that they used, it gave sort of an appearance of being way up in the sky. Hey, Player's Guide. And the idea is that that's what I want it to do. I want the game to give more of a sense of you being up, higher up on a in the sky above a planet of some sort, with some collidable entities in addition to the sort of sky below, and then there will be enemies and like clouds. So Plays Guide, I'm working on, excuse me, a shooter, like a shmup that I'm working on. I'm trying to, I'm still kind of not sure about the game design details, but hopefully the plan is that it's going to have some elements of like a progression where as you beat different levels, you get different abilities for your ship. Similar to like how Mega Man gets different abilities, but it's still pretty early on. I'm working on mostly the sort of tech stuff, getting things moving and exported from PNG over to the NES. And of course, part of this is me learning how to do that stuff. So, you know, it's kind of a educational thing that people are watching me struggle through this and will realize that, you know, it's possible to do. It just takes time and patience. And so let's see. So right now we are, I think we are just incrementing the camera position, or, well, we're decrementing the camera position one at a time. So what I want to do instead is I want to have sort of a counter that we'll use first, and then when we hit a certain number of frames, we'll decrement the counter, the camera Y one more time. So let's where are we here? So this is the 0 page, and then this is where our entities are. So let's do this here. Let's call this camera counter. There's 1, and we'll just do, we'll wait a second. We'll do 60 frames, and then we will do the decrement of the camera position. Subtract camera. Let's see. Load camera Y decrement set. Okay, because it's the 60. Okay, so increment camera counter. Compare. Where's my calculator? 63C branch not equal to the next label. Otherwise, it will actually do that. We just need to store that in the camera counter. So let's see, that should have changed the speed of the scroll. So the player is not moving at the same speed. Okay, hold on a second. The player... Whoa, okay. So let's go to process player. Offset name by camera, modify velocity based on world position, then transform to screen position. So let's see. Player is moving at a totally different speed. Y velocity. But what's weird about that is that seems to have had the opposite effect of what I wanted to do. It's been a while since we've been in this, and the abilities save, you're going to have sort of a limited number of uses of them. And the idea would be that then you could go back to levels that you played before and get into areas that you couldn't get into previously, even though it's an auto scroll. Again, still kind of early on here in terms of thinking, but that's my idea right now anyway. Camera counter 60. Store camera counter, load Y position decrements, set clear, subtract 1. Branch carry set. So this is the 16 bits. Subtract. Why isn't this working? If I make this 120, that's 78. The scroll should be much slower. But it seems like the scroll isn't changing whatsoever. Is it because... Oh, yeah, because this is moving at the same speed as... Okay. So this also has to move and be done here with the camera, because what's happening is the scroll register is being scrolled independently of the camera position, which is bad. It shouldn't do that. It needs to do that at the same speed. Okay, well that's a little bit more correct, because the ship actually collided and is moving at a faster pace than the background, which is fine. So let's see. So 60 is 3C. I don't see though. Yeah, I know this sprite is looping here. Why? Now this is not scrolling at all. So let's see. Branch if not equal to. Oh, that's done scroll. That's not right. So let's see. We will call this skip scroll process, and we will branch to this. Okay, so camera counter increment compare to 3C, branch not equal to skip scroll process, which is down there. Otherwise load 0 into camera counter, then decrement the scroll Y, load scroll Y, compare to FF, branch done scroll, otherwise load E. Yeah, that's all good. Then increment the scroll counter, deal with the Y, the camera Y position. Then we're going to check the objects to see if we need to spawn any bad guys. And then here we load the scroll counter to see if we are at the end of a row or the last pixel of a row. And then we go through this whole crazy process of loading the next row into memory. So that's bizarre, though. Why isn't this working? Let's restart and check. So camera counter is 0. So in theory, we should be going until we get to here. Well, that should only be 60 frames. Why? Value is E9. Compare 3C branch. Well, of course it's not equal there, but why camera counter 3C? What am I doing wrong here? Why did that never ever even get called? That's bizarre. Like, that should have been called at least once. It's counting to 60 for the frame count. Something weird like that. Oh, the carry wasn't clear? That's strange. No. Oh, no, it's okay. It's fine. Why are you still breaking on that? Why are you being goofy, messing? Why is this breaking? Oh, these are... Okay. So get rid of that one. Go back to that. What? That's camera counter. Hey, Scott. What is going on right now? I am perplexed because this is a really simple test and this should not be having this problem. Oh, except I'm an idiot. That's the problem. You know, you stop doing it for a while and you forget the things that you need, like, hey, that should be an A when you do the compare. It's not magic. Let's try that again. There we go. Alright, so the ship is going to inevitably sort of crash, but okay, now we're scrolling at the pace that I wanted us to be. Well, not at the pace I wanted us to be, but at a slower pace, and we're still colliding in the same way, so that's good. So let's speed this up a little bit because it's definitely too slow. So we're at 1E. Let's see if that's a little bit more reasonable. I gotta fix the player's speed because obviously the player has a velocity that was matching the prior scrolling speed, which means that basically I have to keep backing up to avoid hitting these barriers, which is no good. Cool thing is that although it's a little cumbersome right now to be doing this, the collisions are working spot on, so that's good. Let's mess with the player velocity here. So let's see. So right now we are, I believe, modifying the Y velocity. Let's see, offset entity by camera, modify the velocity based on world position. Are we just... Okay, so we are not actually using the Y velocity right now. We are just moving the player. We were moving the player at a fixed Y rate. Yeah, Scott, I was trying to take into consideration what you had said when we talked about it. So hopefully people can actually see this giant mess now. So the problem with what I'm doing there is processing the player. I guess what we can do is, so that's the player's animation state or entity state essentially. Can use timer. And increment that. So let's do this. Let's increment. We're going to increment timer at a rate similar to the camera counter. And we're going to compare it. Same thing. Except we'll actually load it into A this time so that we don't sit here wondering why it's not working. That's the thing, when you're, when you don't work in the 6502 for a while, your brain kind of decides to forget a lot of it. And it's tempting not to work in it sometimes because you get comfortable working with the high-level stuff, and then you don't want to come back to 6502, or at least I don't, because you just kind of get the warm fuzzies from C and being able to write if-then-else type stuff very easily. Store it in entities. Not that this is super hard, but it's just more cumbersome. Actually, I don't want to do entity complete. I want to do Y velocity skip, we'll say. Or how about we'll just write it like English. Skip Y velocity. There, that's better. Skip Y velocity. So we just basically built the same kind of counter as we're doing for the background, as for the player, but it's not working. Why is it not working? So let's see. Jump entity complete if it's not a lie. Branch if equal to compare entity alive. Branch to next label. Offset entity by camera. Wait, what? Otherwise jump and oh right. Yeah, move this here where it's actually going to get called. It's helpful. So obviously want to do some changes to things like the enemy spawns to make that a little bit faster than it is right now and not take quite so long. We don't want these barrier type objects being quite so plentiful because they're not as important now as they were before, since the speed and the maneuverability maybe are not as critical. If we're going to do the background sort of like this, I mean, it really kind of brings into question, do we want to, how much is background collision going to be an issue at this speed? There are the bad guys spawning. Obviously, you got to watch out or I'll crash into the background. So that's all working in and of itself. I guess part of what I'm running into here at this point is I think what all people making games run into, which is that now we're at a point where, you know, the core engine stuff kind of works, but we don't really have a solid design for the game other than sort of the core mechanic of it being a shooter. And while that certainly is obviously important to defining what we're doing, it will only take you so far before you kind of have to make some key decisions about how the game is going to play. Maybe this will... Well, that was weird. Started up tiled and my frame rate dropped quite a bit, it looked like. So if we go back to the map here, we have a lot of empty space. And then we have that bit at the end that's going to cause the player to crash at the end. What I think I want to do is let's fill let's fill the background with the blue tiles. So we have those, and then let's see. Rectangle. Oh, that's a select, though. Is this gonna... No? Well, that works. I don't know what that rectangle select does. Other than make an annoying selection there. There we go. So we can kind of empty out all of this stuff. We have our green tile. We can maybe do some might be cool if we can do some meta tiles that have more rounded edges for making it look like you're flying high over some sort of continent or some landmass, and maybe add some additional interesting content to the background. But for now, just kind of add these little bits to the map, just so it's not black and it's not all those collidable bumpers. And then maybe we can fill the rest with the green, and that's the end. And we'll save that and export it as this. And then we'll re-export the whole thing. Okay, so that, build that. Let's see what that looks like now. All right, so that makes it look a little bit more like what I wanted it to look like initially. I think I want to get rid of, I've talked about this before. I know we spent some time adding the status bar, but in the end, kind of feel like I don't actually care about that anymore. I think we can do information that we want at the top with sprites. And then obviously the challenge here is that at this speed it doesn't look quite as good scrolling. We need to add some stuff to make it look a little more dynamic, which is, I guess, why games like Twin Bee added these clouds that fly by. Oh, there's our enemy ships. They're also moving at kind of a slow speed, and then the other thing is, because we're moving at such a slow speed and I want the enemies to be moving faster, this additional space being taken up is kind of not as it doesn't have any really useful effect. So let's I'm pretty sure interrupt counter setup. Let's get rid of this. We can always bring this back, but where is the, forget what the sort of pound define. There's I have some other stuff that if def status bar. We'll just turn this off. Counter interrupt. All right, so that should turn off the status bar. Cool. Now, of course, what we're seeing is that as we hit the bottom, so we may actually end up we may have to fix some of that. I mean, part of why we're seeing that is because, as we've talked about, there's overscan, and I have the overscan. Interesting. So I have the overscan turned. Guess we never noticed it because we had the status bar at the bottom, because that's a pretty large area that's getting loaded in. So I'll have to fix that too. Is that really just one row that's going in there? No, it's actually, it's interesting. It loaded. Well, lots of things to fix here, but also let's go back and look at this for a second. Where are we at in our map? Just want to make sure that this is actually looking right. So it actually looks like what's happening is that we are you know what we might want to do? So what's happening is that it's loading up the next row sort of on the bottom as we're scrolling up into it, which is fine. Like that's what we made it do, but again, because we introduced the status bar, it was not something that was visible. Additionally, I think because of the speed that we were scrolling at, it made it a little bit probably less egregious. But now, with the slowness of the scrolling that we have here, we're going to need to fix this up a little bit because this looks kind of terrible. And if I go into the PPU viewer, it looks, but it also looks like it's doing 2 rows at a time, which is weird. Right, because I guess it would be potentially well. It's interesting that the status bar kind of hid this problem. Let me go back to this for a second. I want to see. So let's see what we've got here. So this thing here. We've got 2 rows at the bottom, which are really these rows here. And when we get we load the 1 row and then the next row, yeah, see, that looks like it loaded 2 rows, which I don't remember doing that, but it's possible that it's always done that because of the status bar being in the way. Where is that code? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change... Curious to see if we change this to just go every frame like we were before. Do we still see the same behavior? Yeah, we do. It's like somehow I inadvertently managed to make it load 2 rows at a time instead of just 1. Which I guess is technically harder. I don't know why the enemies only just appeared there. Eventually we should get to the, yep. That was the end of the level. So that, I mean, that's all the data is loading correctly, but it is loading too much. So let's see. Checks the scroll counter. If we hit 8, then we want to increment the meta tile sub row. Otherwise, we're good with the skipping the row process. So if we load, we reset the scroll counter. We load the meta tile Y, so the position we're in the meta tile itself. Oh, right. Okay. And we subtract, let's see, load A. So we scroll counter, load A, meta tile Y, set clear, subtract 4. So we're subtracting 4 tiles from that. Then we're restoring that into memory, and then we're comparing it. And if it's equal to FC, it's because we have basically done 0 minus 4. So we've run out of meta tile rows. So we're going to increment to the next. We're going to increment to the next meta tile row, or well, it's not really increment, but it's go to the next meta tile row. Then we're going to, if it's equal to that, otherwise we're going to go to the load. Okay, so if we've, oh, maybe that's why. Is it that we're loading both the meta tile row and then going to the next row accidentally because we're not keeping track of that. Let's see. So if we are incrementing to the meta tile row, we're going to load 12, and then we're going to store that in mtile y. We're going to increment our meta tile flag, set bit 2 to 1, so that we know we need to update the attributes or the attribute mode value so that the bit 2 is set. So then load row mem, set the carry, subtract 8, store row mem, load new row. Otherwise, yep, that's if we rolled, or if we remove the carry because we rolled over from the subtract. So now we're going to load the new row. So meta tile flag, we're going to OR it. With 2. And then we're going to store it, and we're going to load y and store y into tile counter, and then load the meta tile value. So we're now at the process of, this is actually loading the row. Load the meta tile value from the map data, and then multiply by 16 to offset for the number of tiles per meta tile. So load A, the row mem, transfer A to X, do the meta tile, load a meta tile, lookup X, and then shift by 16, or multiply by 2, 4, 8, 16, yep, clear carry and add the mtile Y, transfer A to X, and the Y to A, and we're going to push it and grab the tile counter, and then we're going to get the meta tile and store it into the new tile position, and then store Y back and pull A and transfer A to Y and compare that to if we got 8, because we are loading 8 tiles, 8 meta tiles across, is that right? Where's tiled? Yeah, we're doing 8 meta tiles across, so we should be doing the one row of the 8 meta tiles across, and then load a meta tile flag compared to 3. If this is 0, then the flag wasn't set, and we can skip modifying. Okay, yeah, we don't need to modify the attributes because there was no change to the attributes because we're still within the same meta tile where the attributes had been set up properly. Otherwise, we need to mess with that. I'm not sure why. Not sure why this would cause a secondary set of updates, unless I'm just not looking at this right, but it seems strange. Seems like every time it's updating, it's loading the entire meta tile and not just the one row, which shouldn't be happening. If a meta tile is 32 by 32, that's 8 by 8. Well, the hilarious thing is then it's doing way more than it should be. You know how we can tell for sure? Let's go back into tiled and let's add a bumper offset from the beginning. So like right over here, we'll save and export that, and we'll see if that gets loaded as a single load. If it doesn't, it should be getting loaded in 8x8. I don't remember, or maybe we did and I didn't care because it was so fast that it was able to handle. I don't remember, honestly, and it's been a while. But obviously that doesn't work anymore. What we can do is we can change it so that if we ever go back to it, we can re-enable that. But you're gonna build? Okay. Let's see. Put the scrolling back so we'll be able to see pretty clearly without modifying the emulation speed. Yeah, I'm pretty sure if not 32 by 32, it's definitely doing 2 rows because we're getting the overscan and it's loading that row and then the next, it looks like it's an entire meta tile. I just don't remember doing that. See you later, Scott. Thanks for stopping by. Okay, so it... Oh, it's not... Oh, okay. It's loading... It's loading the entire attribute? It's loading the entire attribute for the meta... Okay. Interesting. So it's actually an attribute glitch, not a tile glitch. That makes more sense. And the only reason that it looks like it's a tile is because these are solid. If I had made these... Alright, that actually makes more sense. So what's happening... I hadn't considered that. So what's happening is, as we scroll... In the NES, it's scrolling smoothly like this. And when we get to the point where we have this... can I get something that isn't the tile? Yeah. So when we get to a boundary here, where we get a new tile, like one of these green tiles, what's happening is that we are loading just the row of 8x8s, but the palette that's being used for the meta tile is different, right? So the meta tile for the quote-unquote water, right, that we're kind of displaying here is using a palette that's green. And we can look at that in the asset tool. If we what is it called? Green tile? Oops. So if we look at this, this is just this green tile, right? And it's got the one color in the palette, which is the green that we're using. And then for For the blue tile, same thing, except we're using that blue color. Actually, maybe want to change the color. Kind of feel like that looks a little bit nicer. Let's re-export this. Is it not map1 JSON? No, it's not. It's map1.text. Okay, so if we go back to the export folder here for a second, replace all the assets again and rebuild it and reload it, and I didn't wait long enough. Or maybe I didn't change the color as much as I thought. I don't know. Whatever. Not really super important. The point is that because it's using the same color and it's only a one color tile, basically what we're getting is that as we update the attributes for the meta tiles that we're loading here, it makes it look like we're loading these full tiles, even though we're not. We're only loading partial. So as we make these meta tiles a little bit more interesting looking, we will get a we will see a different kind of glitch, which is that we will actually see the colors be wrong on the bottom. So what we need to do for something like that, most likely, is we would probably want to do something where at the bottom, we're not going to necessarily do a MMC3. We won't do an MMC3 timer split. What we'll likely want to do is a sprite 0 hit and swap over to this side so that we get black over here so that it covers up our attribute changes, so that it's not as obvious what we're doing, because that kind of looks ugly. And that should be relatively simple. If we were trying to do multi-way scrolling, that would be a lot harder, but in fact, Derek talked about that last week when we were talking about Alia and Alia's scrolling. Because we're only scrolling in one direction, we only have to hide it on the bottom here. So it should be pretty easy. I'm pretty much convinced we're going to move away from MMC3. The reason being that it's doing way more than we actually need. We don't really need the interrupt timer. And then additionally, we also, when this is done and I actually want to make cartridges, MMC3 cartridges are probably the most expensive to get. And I know that, that might not matter for people who want to play it in just an emulator, but I think, I want this to be something that's actually a physical cartridge. So we're going to have to, I'm going to have to probably switch to something else. But anyway, Mitch 3A, are you trying to have something for the NESDev comp? Yeah, I mean, this won't be for the NESDev comp. This is a longer term project. I'm working on something separately that I've started. And the plan is to have something just like with a few levels. It'll it probably won't have any scrolling. It won't have or what's the right word? It won't have scrolling as complex as this. It'll have the scrolling up and down in the PPU name table, so that I don't have to load in new rows as we scroll from top to bottom, just to keep it simple. But I haven't had a chance to work on that much. I've been busy with work and travel and then this, so we'll see if I actually get that done or not. So let's see. We can. Let's do this. Let's take, since we have MMC3. Since we have it, let's make use of it. Okay, we're gonna use it to hide that effect on the bottom for now. But in the next, once we get this done, I think I'll wrap up for today. I know I didn't really do a lot, but it's more so just getting back into this and getting the streaming stuff, the scrolling stuff working differently than it was. It's kind of brought to light a bunch of stuff that's missing that we're going to need for this to look reasonable art-wise, and some additional sprite types that aren't enemies. We can we'll add those in the next stream. But let's do this. So let me think about this. We want to make this longer because I just want to have it show up kind of at the end. Is that too long? Yeah, it was too long. I'm just kind of guessing here at what's going to be a good value. That looks. Now, one thing that's going to help right now, because this is so blocky, it really looks kind of crappy that it's scrolling so slow. I mean, it's scrolling 1 pixel at a time, so it's not like we can really do any smoother than that. But what we can do, I mean, so you can see it got rid of that effect, right, of the attribute glitch. Let's see if we can kind of shave that down a little bit, just so that we're not using quite so much screen space up to block it. Just want to kind of do the minimum. Yeah, that looks like. That looks like that's doing a pretty good job of blocking it out there. I'm not sure how it's possible that with the emulation speed that high it's not scrolling faster, but okay. I mean, the other thing we could do, if it ends up being that I'm not happy with the way that this looks at the bottom, with the sprite 0 hit, we can, I mean, that's not terrible. You know, obviously the graphics are terrible. What we can do is we can make sure that the background tiles are using the same colors so that the attributes aren't actually flipping, and we will get the benefit of we won't see those graphical glitches as the attributes are getting updated. I have to play around with the speed at which this is all occurring, so that we can make it feel a little bit more reasonable here, because it's partially the graphics, it's partially the actual speed, it's the limitations of scrolling one pixel at a time on such a low resolution screen. It's not like you can do now with a 1080 display, and you've got all that resolution to scroll your background, and you can do subpixel sort of rendering to make it look more smooth. So yeah, I have a lot to consider here now that we're getting back into how this is actually working, and now that I've messed with this, and I'm just not, in all honesty, prepared right now to do more than what we've done. I need to get back into the assembly side of this and get more into figuring out what the design of this is actually going to be like to play, so that we have a better sense of what we're going to do. And then, like I said, I'm going to remove the MMC3 mapper stuff, which the only thing we were doing was we were using the the interrupt, which we can get rid of and do a sprite 0 hit for hiding the attribute glitch. And in fact, I actually maybe don't even care about that right now. We could probably just get rid of it for now, and we'll worry about the sprite 0 stuff later, because it's not super hard, and I don't want to get caught up even more so than I already have in kind of tweaking the tech side of things, because it's kind of easy to do compared to actual game design. So I'm going to call it a night for tonight. I realize, like I said, that we didn't really get a whole lot done, but I'm going to be more prepared on Thursday to get into what we're doing here and hopefully have some more graphics ready, and we can start putting together things like I said, sprites that will kind of come down from the top to give a sense of motion and depth to the screen, some background stuff that looks a little more finished, and then we'll see how that goes. So as always, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, you can find me on Twitter at Clairvis, Mitch3A. See you later. I'm also on Discord at Nintendo Age as Zelius. You can find me at my email, which I had under my video feed previously. And you can always also comment on the video on YouTube. So I'll post the recording once I'm done here. But yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good night, and see you Thursday.